everyone. I'm Sammy Parker with Bechtel Global Logistics. Welcome to this session, Breakbulk and Project Market Outlook. Our speaker is Mrs. Amanda Duyon. She is the Regional Director for Energy Industries Council. Please join me in welcoming Amanda.
All right, where's my screen? Here I am. I've been tasked with the very important duty to give you an update on all things happening across the energy sectors. Thank you for the lovely introduction. So what I'm going to be covering today is each of the energy sectors, so oil and gas, renewables, and energy transition. And I'll start from a global level and triangulate that down to the US. And then I also have a slide on Latin America because I think it's fitting. So here we're looking at the total new project announcements made in 2021, and this is both on CapEx and OpEx. There were a total of 2,500 projects added in 2021 versus 1,800 in 2020 and 1,250 in 2019. As you'll see, renewables account for over 50%, and if we include offshore wind in that, renewables account for 58% of the total project announcements added into EIC data stream. This is driven largely by announcements in onshore wind and solar. Also, we have the energy transition technologies such as floating offshore wind, carbon capture, hydrogen, and energy storage. And in 2020, these represented 14% of the total projects announced. And this year, so from the 1st of January to the 1st of September, energy transition, it represents 20% and is just behind the number of new projects announced in mature hydrocarbons. The largest growth in energy transition has come from hydrogen and energy storage. Sorry, you didn't have the slide there. It's hard to see it from all the way over here. So there's the slides, and you can see the breakdown between everything. So if we look at this year to date, approximately 2,050 projects have been added up to the first week of September, as I mentioned. Renewables make up 47%. With the inclusion of offshore wind, that is 53%. So well over 50% of new project announcements are coming from the renewable sector. Again, this is driven largely by onshore wind and solar. The year has been especially fruitful for energy transition technologies such as floating offshore wind, carbon capture, hydrogen, and energy storage, accounting for 21% of new projects. Again, this is slightly less than mature hydrocarbons as well as the power sector. In line with the commitments from COP26 around new build coal, we have yet to see any proposed projects around coal-fired power plants. And the biggest growth in energy transition is, again, energy storage and hydrogen, and that's particularly green hydrogen. So let's look at the specific factors involved in each of the sectors, whether there's been a growth or a decline. For renewables, project announcement growth has been driven by commoditized renewables in developed markets such as Europe, North America, and also seeing some notable growth in South America in this sector. For offshore wind, we see an ever-increasing number of developments being announced in the sector, and this is because the cost of the technology is coming down more as markets looked at the opportunities in fixed bottom developments, while we also see a ramp up of new announcements for floating offshore wind with technology that can be deployed in deeper waters. Europe and South America lead the way in the number of offshore wind project announcements being made, while we have also seen an increasing number of developments proposed in the Asia-Pacific market. China, the UK, and Brazil are leading the way in terms of announcements, and the investment levels will continue to increase over the course of the decade. There's an increasing number of commercial scale developments in energy storage being announced globally, which often go hand in hand with new hybrid solar and hybrid wind projects, especially in the US. In North America, Europe, and Australia, these countries are leading the way in terms of new announcements. If we look at battery storage, this is the dominant tech, with the new tech CAES and LAES and thermal seen in the US, Chile, Canada, and most notably Spain for the LAES. If we look at hydrogen, during 2021, over 170 projects were announced, and the scale and size of the projects announced are much bigger than those previously announced year on year. This year, we have 145 new hydrogen projects being announced across the globe, and we look on track to surpass the number that we saw in 2021. Now, you'll note that these are mostly green hydrogen projects from renewable power electrolysis. In fact, of the developments announced, 82% are for green hydrogen developments. Blue hydrogen does, however, have a place to play a significant role, and has been announced in Europe and North America. Project announcements are being led by Australia, the USA, Canada, and Egypt, and the UK and Chile are close behind for green. Blue is led by the UK, while Canada and the US have announced sizable proposals as well. Looking at CCUS, it's interesting to look back because CCUS is not a new technology. We've been using it in enhanced oil recovery for quite some time, but it does have a checkered history with government policy supporting and then refracting that support. The supply chain remains nervous because of this. However, it's recognized that decarbonization of industry cannot happen without CCS, and we have seen a significant increase in the number of proposed projects since 2021. In the US, however, we do have tax incentives provided by 45Q and as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is a sign by the US government of its support. The number of CCUS projects announced to date in 2022 is already surpassing the total number that we saw in 2021. So looking at oil and gas, the number of new oil and gas projects is in a downward trend, and this has been happening since 2018, but 2022 numbers will surpass what we saw in 2021 by the end of this year. There's an ever-increasing number of biofuels announcements, particularly in the renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuels area. And this is for both greenfield and brownfield developments, including conversion of existing refineries. There's an increasing number of announcements being made across Europe, driven specifically by the UK, the Netherlands, and with Sweden and Germany. North America proposals dominated by the US, followed by Canada, while Brazil dominates in South America. Now, the reduction in FIDs in the upstream and downstream sector have been happening globally, but the increase in midstream, particularly in North America, is because of new LNG terminals and gas transport infrastructure. So the Inflation Reduction Act provides a boost to clean energy, but it also provides a boost to traditional oil and gas. The act requires the Department of Interior to award leases to the highest bidders in lease cell 257 within 30 days of being enacted. The law also creates a link between offshore wind and oil and gas licensing. So essentially, if BOEM wants to launch an offshore wind lease cell, then it must also launch one for oil and gas. Regarding the midstream sector, there's been a major growth in the number of sales and purchase agreements for LNG developers in the Gulf Coast, and this has been driven by increased demand from Europe. We've seen FIDs over the last 3 months, which include the Cheniere Stage 3 of the Corpus Christi terminal and the Venture Global Plaquemines project. On the downstream side, biofuels specifically, we've seen an award contract with Worley for the detailed engineering services for a renewable diesel plant in Nebraska, and another contract with Koch Engineered Solutions for a Grand Fuels renewable diesel plant in Louisiana. So this is just a map with a few projects of interest. and there's a lot of opportunity across upstream, midstream, and downstream. Key highlights in the upstream sector include the acquisition of the North Plate field by Shell, which is renamed as Sparta. The field will be developed with a new build, lightweight, semi-submersible platform, which could incorporate the design chosen for the Vito and Wellfield development projects by Shell. In the onshore segment, Santos has recently announced a final investment decision to proceed with the first development phase of the Pikka project in Alaska. And the capex on this project is estimated at $2.6 billion and an output of 80,000 barrels a day. This is expected to go operational sometime in 2026. There's two key projects I wanted to highlight in the midstream sector. In May, Venture Global reached a final investment decision on the Plaquemines LNG export facility and the associated Gator Express pipeline. And this was after receiving a $13.2 billion in financing for the terminal's initial phase. And this should produce about 13.3 million tons per annum. Then in June, Cheniere announced the final investment decision on stage 3 of the Corpus Christi LNG export terminal, and Bechtel has been given a full notice to proceed with the construction. On the downstream side, construction is set to begin next year on a sustainable aviation fuel facility in Louisiana. This project is by DG Fuels and is planned to produce the fuel from the synthesis of hydrogen generated by an associated green hydrogen project. Another key project in the downstream space is a construction of a petrochemicals facility in Corpus Christi. The Corpus Christi Polymers joint venture will build a $1.6 billion facility, and Worley has been awarded the construction management and general services contract for this project. Moving on to offshore wind, while initial developments will see activity focused on states across the eastern seaboard, and you can see on the right-hand side that chart, the new 15 gigawatt target for floating offshore wind capacity on top of the previously announced 30 gigawatts by 2030 goal will boost developments in the West Coast as well. The latest target will be supported by the Floating Wind Shot initiative, which aims to drive down costs by 75%, and this is through incentives for R&D investment in engineering and manufacturing. We're also seeing some activity in the Carolinas. So the Carolina Long Bay lease sale that was held in May awarded leases to Total Energies and Duke Energies. And so from what you can see, the majority of the developers are European players that are playing here in the US. There's another lease sale that's expected in California by the end of this year, as well as in the US Gulf of Mexico by 2023. Offshore wind has to be supported by a robust infrastructure, and Skanska was awarded a contract by the Virginia Port Authority to redevelop the Portsmouth Marine Terminal, just one of the various redevelopment initiatives across the East Coast that are taking place. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, has launched its third offshore wind solicitation for 2 gigawatts, and proposals are due on the 22nd of December this year. And the awards are expected sometime early in 2023. So, projects of interest. Construction is already underway at the Vineyard Wind offshore wind project, and this is the first commercial scale offshore wind farm in the US. It will feature 62 turbines manufactured by GE and is slated to start operation in 2024. US contractors Everline and Ironhouse have been selected to support the project. So Everline will provide a full SCADA system for the 62 turbines, and this will include the equipment acquisition, configuration, installation, testing, and commissioning, whilst Ironhouse will provide commissioning management services for the project. Another project that's soon to start construction is the Ocean Wind 1, developed by Ørsted. In April, Jungoli Power and Burns & McDonnell were awarded an EPC contract to install 2 high voltage substations and nearly 9 miles of underground cable. and this will connect the offshore wind farm to the onshore electric grid at 2 landfall points. Equinor is also developing the Empire Wind project and the Beacon Wind farm off New York, and both are expected to start operations before the end of the decade. So looking at hydrogen, I mentioned the IRA earlier, and there is an incentive for green hydrogen. The Act calls for a subsidy of $3 per kilo of green hydrogen produced in the U.S., and this will depend on the life cycle emissions as well as staff wages. This would make green hydrogen competitive in parts of the country such as the Northwest. Blue hydrogen, on the other hand, could receive 75 cents per kilo, and this is due to the methane leakages that are associated with blue hydrogen. So US-made clean hydrogen is poised to become one of the cheapest in the world. And this is a great opportunity for anyone who's an electrolyzer manufacturer. Green hydrogen will also play a role in decarbonizing the steel and fertilizer industries because these are hard to abate sectors with limited options for mitigating their greenhouse gas emissions. So some projects of interest. Green hydrogen developments represent the majority of hydrogen projects in the US, and the tax incentives provided by the IRA are likely to increase this number of projects coming forward. So some project highlights: the ACS Delta initiative by Chevron, Mitsubishi, and Magnum development for a green hydrogen project in Utah. It's coupled with an underground storage capacity. And ACS Delta has awarded a contract to the Norwegian firm Hydrogen Pro AS, requiring the fabrication and supply of 220 megawatts of high-pressure alkaline electrolyzers. The Southern California Gas Company, meanwhile, is planning to build a U.S. green hydrogen distribution infrastructure in the Los Angeles industrial basin, featuring at least 10 gigawatts of electrolyzers. And then in the Gulf Coast, UG Fuels is planning a green hydrogen facility in Louisiana, and this could feature about 839 megawatt electrolyzer. So the Gulf states concentrate the majority of CCS initiatives that we're seeing, and that's because there's existing infrastructure and the geologic prospects for CO2 storage, not to mention the proximity to industrial hubs. The Inflation Reduction Act also includes CCUS, and it's specifically projects associated with enhanced oil recovery. On top of that, the DOE announced in July $2.6 billion of funding for 6 CCS projects under the Carbon Capture Demonstration Project Program. So today, the biggest initiative is that of Exxon Mobil to develop a CCS hub in the Houston Ship Channel. And we have Shell, Air Liquide, BASF, and several other players that have interest in joining this project. So speaking of the Exxon Mobil project, it stands out as the most capital intensive one at US 100 billion and would capture around 100 million tons of CO2 per year. ExxonMobil is proposing to build infrastructure to capture its own CO2 emissions, as well as those from power plants, oil refineries, and chemical plants in the Houston area. The CO2 would be piped into a storage reservoir thousands of meters under the water in the Gulf of Mexico, and the project could be fully operational by 2040. Another key project is the Summit Carbon Solutions Initiative. This project will collect carbon dioxide from 32 ethanol plants throughout Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, and South Dakota, and will permanently store the CO2 in geologic storage sites in North Dakota. So SKENS, a Korean player, has invested $110 million in the Summit Carbon Solutions CCS project as part of its push for a renewables energy business. CCS is also an alternative for the LNG business. And so Talos Energy is planning a carbon capture and sequestration project adjacent to Freeport LNG's natural gas pretreatment facility here in Texas. And the project will utilize Freeport's geological sequestration site located less than half a mile from the point of capture. And this will have up to a 30-year injection term and permanently sequester the CO2. So I mentioned I wanted to cover Latin America because I think it's important with the proximity to the U.S. The Latin America market, as well as the Caribbean, offers a variety of project opportunities and indeed across all the sectors. So there's near-term capital-intensive projects that tend to focus on the offshore E&P sector. So Brazil and Guyana are leading players in the offshore E&P market in this region. So Petrobras in Brazil, they have a robust portfolio of the pre-salt projects requiring FPSOs. The Buezios field in its many development phases concentrates a significant share of the company's pre-salt capex. Meanwhile, in Guyana, with Exxon Mobil's project, Exxon Mobil recently sanctioned the fourth development phase at the Stabroek, the Yellowtail field, and the Uaru project is set to be the fifth development phase. Exxon and partners plan to install at least 10 FPSOs in Guyana by the end of the decade. So significant oil and gas opportunities are also present in Trinidad, in Mexico, and as well in Argentina, with key project highlighted on the map. And I'm happy to go through any of these projects with you later. The region is also a key market for green hydrogen initiatives, and we're seeing Chile and Brazil stand out in the region when it comes to green hydrogen. So, in summary, the near-term opportunities in terms of capital expenditure to 2027 are abundant. Each energy sector represented to the left. We can see that more than a quarter of the near-term investment in the U.S. is associated with the midstream sector, mainly LNG export projects. And this trend is not new, but it is definitely emphasized by the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The near-term capex and downstream renewables, conventional power projects, including fossil generation, as well as transmission, distribution, and the upstream sector all share similar numbers. So sectors such as offshore wind, hydrogen, CCUS, and energy storage don't capture as much capex in the near term, but these are opportunities for the longer term. The chart to the right summarizes the capex in large groups. If we look at near-term investment, the energy supply chain still has a lot to offer to traditional oil and gas, conventional power sectors, with 65% of capex. Renewables and energy transition sectors capture about a third of this over the next 5 years. So that's it from my side. If anyone has any questions. No? I did such a great job then. All right, I'm going to hang out. If you have any questions or want to learn more about our data, just come and see me. Thank you.